Hi, I'm your host, Brent. Welcome to the Climate Guru, where we discuss pressing environmental issues, including with leading experts. Join us for insightful conversations to inform and inspire action in your everyday life. Hi, this is Brent the Climate Guru. Let's have a look at the cabinet selections of Donald Trump and heads of different government agencies, how they may affect the U.S. programs to fight climate change and protect the environment and wild species. The hottest year on record ever recorded was 2024 last year, and 2025 is expected to beat that record in increase in temperatures above pre-industrial levels. The United States, in Paris Agreement, promised to work with other countries to keep global warming below an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, in any case no more than 2 degrees Celsius increase, to avoid the worst effects of climate change, including reaching certain tipping points of natural systems that, if reached, would cause continuous climate change for many years, such as the Antarctic ice mass. If it melts to a certain point, that becomes irreversible. Amazon deforestation, if it reaches a certain point of deforestation of the forests, it becomes irreversible. During the last 4 years, during the Biden administration, the United States spent huge sums to blunt global warming and help communities adapt to a hotter world. The landmark legislation was the Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, $370 billion, the largest amount in history ever expected that's been ever allocated to deal with climate change and protect the natural environment, protect those who are in vulnerable communities. What will happen now that Donald Trump is president and, like his first term, appoints people who are very close to the oil and gas industry, other industries who are not in favor of continuing our fight of climate change? The irony is that many of the factories that are being built now as a result of the billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act of Biden, these factories are built in Republican states. Almost 70 or 80% of them are in Republican states, where there are giant factories, $3, $4, $5, $8 billion factories, building electric batteries, electric vehicles, wind power components. This is the dream that our leaders and politicians are talking about, bringing manufacturing back to the United States from abroad. And this is happening, and it's happening in Republican districts. So what is their attitude about it? Up until now, Republicans have pretty much remained silent. In fact, they did not vote in favor. Not one Republican voted in favor of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, which benefits their states enormously. Now, Donald Trump says climate change is a hoax. Wants to increase production of fossil fuels in electric generation and transportation. He has an idea that we should go backwards to the technology of decades ago in generating electricity from coal, from natural gas, when most of our electricity was generated from those sources, and to go back to using gas-powered vehicles, which again is a technology that really we're moving past. The U.S. and world economies have shifted sharply the last decade towards renewables. Solar, wind, electric vehicles. China is the biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles today. They've taken over the biggest market, which is China, and Europe. They are the biggest seller of electric cars in Europe. And most European car manufacturers have announced that by 2030, 2035, they will never again produce internal combustion vehicles. U.S. car manufacturers have followed suit, have re-engineered, redesigned vehicles that are electric. They retooled factories, built new factories in many of these states because they know that's the direction that the world is moving in. And they have certain conflicts because Trump announces that he wants to roll back fuel emission standards, fuel standards, and yet they have retooled, spent billions of dollars to build factories because they know that's the future. The transformation to renewable energy in production of electricity has been transformational. A couple decades ago, most of our electricity in the United States was generated from coal as the fuel. That shifted to natural gas, which is still a fossil fuel, but burns less carbon than coal. And almost every new electric generating plant that's being built in the United States, almost every one is renewable, solar or wind. And it's simply because it's much, much cheaper to develop a kilowatt of electricity from renewable sources, solar and wind, than it is from fossil fuels. So the economy is driving that. Almost nowhere in the United States is there any development of fossil fuel generating plants. And this is happening all over the world. China is still developing and building coal plants, coal-powered electric generating plants in China, as well as in Asia, where they have a lot of influence and investments. But they are the biggest builders of solar electric generating technology, and they are using more and more in their own country. They're making a transition. So let's take a look at the different heads that Trump has picked. Elon Musk, Department of Government Efficiency. What has he said? Trump has said that Musk will help lead a new panel to radically restructure the government, cutting staff and budgets, and it's expected the environmental agencies will be a chief target. Musk said, we shouldn't be complacent about changing the chemical constituency of our atmosphere and oceans. But climate change definitely will not end the world as we know it. Musk has defunded USAID, a $50 billion a year agency that has humanitarian programs, food, medicine all over the world, but also has huge wildlife preservation programs on many continents, especially building wildlife parks in Africa, in Asia, underwater coral reefs in the Seychelles Islands and the Indian Oceans. Musk has defunded and fired almost everyone from USAID. Musk said climate change is real, but he's made conflicting statements. He said we should bias towards sustainable energy, but we don't have to rush to renewables. The International Energy Agency disagrees and says nations must quickly cut their emissions and transition away from fossil fuels to meet climate goals. Marco Rubio, former senator from Florida, now is the Secretary of State. And what's Rubio said? He said in 2021, climate has always been changing. And no matter what, we have to mitigate against it. No matter how well you think you know the causation, he's not acknowledging the cause of climate change. When Rubio was seeking his Senate seat in 2010, he denied climate change. In 2018, he took the position that global warming was real without acknowledging fossil fuels are the main driver. And he said problems like sea level rise, places like Miami, which is one of the most vulnerable cities to sea level rise, can adapt. Of course, it can't. A couple of decades, it can build dikes and drainage systems, but Miami will be flooded like many coastal cities by the end of the century. He's rejected policies that reduce fossil fuels. And so there's nothing the United States could do to convince China, the world's top greenhouse, to emit less. China is the number one emitter of greenhouse gases today in the world, approaching 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So he's saying we can't convince China, so why bother doing anything? But the United States is the number two emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, number two in the world, with only 4.5% of the world's population. The United States emits 14% of greenhouse gas emissions, ahead of any country, including the entire European Union. So we're certainly not going to see him, Marco Rubio, as a friend to those who are trying to fight climate change. Pete Hegseth, Defense Department, head of the Department of Defense. He has a long history of distorting and denying climate research while on the air as a Fox News host. And he pretty much tracks with Trump's dismissal of global warming as a hoax. Hegseth called climate science a religion. He said it shows liberals want to play God and described climate research as a vast left-wing conspiracy to impose government controls. They can control your life to deal with it no matter what's happening. Hegseth and many others on the right view the issues of climate change as a way for liberals to control society. Hegseth doesn't appear to have taken a firm position on the science of climate change, but has repeatedly framed the issue as a political ploy. Now, the Department of Defense, which he heads, is almost $1 trillion a year allocation of U.S. spending. And its reduction, as Biden has proposed, would be an enormous reduction in expenditure of fossil fuels and subsequent emissions. Now, the Pentagon has also released multiple reports over the last few years on climate change. And it states that climate change in the United States and internationally is a huge threat to national security and can impede the military's ability to carry out its missions. The U.S. Defense Department, in a report, said that climate change is a threat multiplier. It exacerbates existing environmental stresses and security risks. Former Department of Defense head Secretary Lloyd Austin said almost everything the U.S. Defense Department does to defend the American people is jeopardized by climate change. Our department strategies, plans, capabilities, missions, equipment, and risk are growing, especially since the world is not on track to meet its Paris Agreement goals. The risks lie not only with the U.S. border, but in countries impacted by climate change that will affect national security interests as well. One of the issues that has been studied by the United States Department of Defense and the World Bank is the likelihood of hundreds of millions of climate refugees in the world in the next decade. This will create and exacerbate world conflicts. The United States will have millions of climate refugees, people who move away from the Gulf, the Mid-Atlantic, southern states from increasing temperatures and sea level rise. And this will happen in Africa, in Latin America, especially in Southeast Asia. Hundreds of millions of climate refugees. How will that affect the security of the United States and the world? The Pentagon said in a new report that climate change poses immediate risks to national security, will have broad and costly impacts on the way the U.S. military carries out its missions. Climate change, floods, droughts, affects food and water security and degrades the environment, increases the spread of diseases, disrupts essential services like electric production, and these impacts can drive migration. So we expect to see millions of climate refugees over the next decades and toward the end of the century, which will exacerbate and increase global tensions. Environmental Protection Agency head, very important position, Lee Zeldin. Zeldin is a former House member from New York whose positions on climate appear to have shifted. He often noted in his Long Island district that was surrounded by water that we need to take more measures to make coastal areas more resilient. He ran for governor unsuccessfully in New York 2022 and called for reversing New York's ban on hydraulic fracking. So he wanted to continue hydraulic fracking. And as the EPA chief, he's promised to support Trump's energy dominance agenda, which is a focus, again, on fossil fuels, moving backward from the renewable surge that we're on. Zeldin called for a rewrite of the EPA's finding that determined planet-warming greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare. There was a 2000 finding on the Clean Air Act that is the legal underpinning of a host of climate regulations for health, for motor vehicles, power plants, and other sources. And he'd like to reverse that going along with Trump. In 2016, he said, there's more of an awareness and willing to recognize that climate change is real. And Congress is more open-minded towards identifying that. But in 2024 on Fox News, he said, there are regulations that the left wing of this country have been advocating through regulatory power that ends up causing business to go in the wrong direction. So as he's cozied up to Trump, Zeldin's positions on climate have done a 180. Interior Department, Doug Bergman. The Interior Department oversees all public lands, natural resources, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, among other things. The Secretary of the Interior oversees where, whether, and how quickly companies can drill for oil and gas on federal lands and U.S. territorial waters, and decide whether renewable energy projects can get access to those same public spaces. It's a very important position with respect to the environment and climate change. Doug Bergman was the governor of North Dakota, which is home to a huge gas-rich Bakken formation. He has very close ties to the oil and gas industries in North Dakota, in particular Harold Hamm, the billionaire founder and chairman of Continental Resources. During the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, Bergman served as unofficial liaison between Trump and oil and gas executives. Bergman's hearing on his nomination for Secretary stated he views American public lands and waters as part of the country's financial balance sheet, advocated for extracting potential $1 trillion worth of oil and gas via mining and drilling. He wanted to realize Trump's plan of energy independence via energy dominance. Now, we have to remember the United States is the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world today. And we are the largest exporter of natural gas. We have achieved energy independence and dominance. In fact, oil companies are concerned that if production increases, prices will go down. It costs $60 a barrel to produce a barrel of oil. And if prices go down below that, our oil companies will be in trouble. So they're paying some rhetoric, paying oral homage to what Trump's saying, but really they don't want to increase production of oil and gas. Now, the billionaire Oklahoma wildcatter, of course, Harold Hamm, advises Trump on energy policy. And during his position as governor in North Dakota, Bergman has taken a business-oriented approach where agriculture and oil are the main industries. He was asked on CNN, do you agree humans are to blame for what's happening with heat waves and climate change? Bergman said, I know climate is changing. We know that. And I'll tell you, in North Dakota, we're the only state that sets a goal of being carbon neutral by 2030, which is true, and we have to give Bergman credit for that. He wants to use land, farmland, and other rock formations and land to absorb carbon, which is good. He says we're not doing it with a bunch of regulations. We can get there through new mandates, all through innovation. He's advocated for technology to adapt to the effects of climate change and for North Dakota to become carbon neutral by allowing farm areas, helping farmers and others who own land, even public land, to absorb vast amounts of carbon. Bergman, since he became the Secretary, the Interior directed his assistants to conform with Trump's wishes. He eased the way for energy development on federal lands, reinstating all energy leases that had been canceled by the Biden administration, and offering more parcels of public land for oil and gas drilling, among other pro-fuel fossil actions. Director of Public Citizen, Alan Zeibel, a nonprofit consumer organization, said the Interior Department under Bergman appears inclined to shrink or sell off public lands to fossil fuel interests and mining companies, while making expansion of renewable energy more difficult. Its blatant giveaway to the fossil fuel interests, they stated that national monuments, migratory birds, endangered and threatened species will result. Some of nature's most vulnerable resources are in jeopardy after Doug Bergman issued on his first day a 7-page directive weakening their positions and furthering fossil fuel development. Tom Delante, senior attorney with Earth Justice, which sued the Trump administration for its rollback of national monuments in 2017 on behalf of other environmental groups and tribes, said we're at a time when preserving biodiversity and preserving intact landscapes and protecting against climate change should be at the absolute forefront of our policy decision. He said Bergman is on the way to become the worst Interior Secretary, according to Noah Greenwald, Endangered Species Director at the Center for Biological Diversity. He said Bergman has mindless attacks on America's endangered plants and animals and irreplaceable wildlands. So Bergman has some good ideas, absorbing and sequestering carbon, but for the most part, he's fallen in line with Trump's plan to increase fossil fuel development And he has also taken positions that take public land and preservation and provide it to companies that want to drill and mine. Sean Duffy is the new transportation secretary. He was a congressman from Wisconsin, 2010 to 2018. And he signed an order to roll back key fuel economy standards set by President Biden. This was it. He wants to roll back initiatives from the Biden administration aimed at promoting vehicles and reducing greenhouse gases. Under the Biden fuel economy standards, American automakers were required to average 65 miles a gallon by 2031, up from 48 miles the year before. And the average mileage for light trucks would have to increase from 45 to 35 miles per gallon. Just last month, Duffy signed a memo directing his department to immediately rescind and replace all corporate average fuel economy standards and eliminate electric vehicle incentives. Now, California and 12 other states that follow the California rule, which had an agreement with the United States and has an agreement with auto manufacturers, will be a big obstacle to rolling back these initiatives to increase mileage. Agriculture Department, Brooke Rollins, Secretary, one of their important responsibilities to develop scientific assessments of how climate change affects crops, livestock, and manages programs to address impacts of global warming. This is what Brooke Rollins said. She said there's been no warming over 17 years, so all of this discussion about shutting down certain parts of the industry is nothing short of a disaster for the economy. She leads the America First Policy Institute, which is formed by officials from the first administration that promotes oil and gas development. She was president and chief executive of Texas Public Policy Foundation, influential conservative group funded by oil and gas companies that has attacked climate policies. In sum, Trump has followed his first administration plan to put those in charge of our environment, fuel production, those who have the closest ties to those industries that benefit from oil and gas production, mining, offshore drilling, agriculture. So we can expect an attempt by Trump to reverse Biden's climate rules. But remember, Trump lost 80% of the lawsuits that were filed against him in the first term by environmental groups, National Resource Defense Council, Earth Justice, and others to prevent the rollback of climate programs. Thank you. Climate Guru. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Climate Guru podcast. Stay inspired, stay informed, and keep taking action for our planet's future. Until next time, and remember, together we can make a difference.